So let's say you're driving down 76 and you see a person who's holding the sign asking for money. Should you give them money?
Never. That's when helping hurts. Like most businesses, because we do operate with excellence like any other business, we've identified our competitors. Here is PhillyHouse's competitors as we serve a third of all the homeless men in the city of Philadelphia. Our first competitor itself is the streets.
Jeremy,
Chris,
thank you so much for hanging out today.
thanks for having me today.
How did you go from being homeless to helping the homeless?
Oh my gosh. Actually, I think the better answer to that is how I ended up homeless. And so I've actually been homeless twice in my life. The first time I was in my 20s, living in Boston, a full-time job, but living the oxymoron of these statements that I was a paid youth pastor in an inner city church, which typically that's the oxymoron, to actually get paid to do youth ministry in inner city church. But I found myself in a very compromised position. So at the time I was working for a church plant, and I secured a citywide grant that paid for me to be able to work in that church, a part of a citywide effort to be able to curb youth violence in the Boston public schools. So I was hired by, the grant was provided by a coalition of Black and Latino churches called the Boston 10-Point Coalition. So the component of my housing, part of that grant opportunity, was provided by the church. So the church that I was working for put me up in a situation, a block from the church, which it was a big Victorian house owned by this guy that had renovated the whole house. And so I had the entire third floor. It was a beautiful situation where for $400 a month, prepaid, getting back to that in a second, prepaid, had the entire third floor kind of attic of the house to myself, that had a private bedroom. And that worked out from about January till around Easter time in April. And so since I worked Sundays, there's this one particular day I came home on a Sunday afternoon, and my roommate, the landlord, the owner of the house, thought that I was always out, and I suddenly heard some noises in my bathroom that were very manly noises, to realize that he was not alone in the shower, and he was having, let's just say, some physical connection with another man. And so, being that I was the youth pastor in the evangelical Christian church a block away, I was a little bit disturbed by that, right? So I definitely closed my eyes, went back to sleep, and took a nap, and pretended that and hoped that he didn't know I was home. Weeks subsequent to that, I began to notice that with all the bedrooms that he had on the second floor, I began to then take curious observation that he had a lot of weekend male occupants, tenants, visitors. And shortly, just kind of curious about that, discovering that in the neighborhood, he was known as running a crack house for homosexuals. So a gay crack house, and these tenants that was living in the second room, of course, were being given drugs by this landlord owner in exchange for sex. So prepaid, I had no way to get my money back, and embarrassed by the whole situation, approaching about summer. So this would have been, oh my gosh, a long time ago, 1998. So back in summer 1998, I decided to sleep in my car. So I did that for 4 months.
How interlinked is I'm going to have to, you're going to be patient with me today. I need to think of delicate ways to ask these questions.
Does that shock you?
It does.
What I just said to you? Yeah,
Yes.
you didn't know that type of story was gonna. We've known each other for a little while, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had no idea that was going to be the first answer in terms of how I became homeless the first time.
I have a question about how interlinked having to sell oneself's body and drugs are. Those two, how interlinked are those two issues in inner city?
Well, as you know, your studio right here is in Kensington, and this is considered to be the nation's largest open-air drug market. Most that are actively using out on our streets within blocks from here are paying for those drugs by selling their bodies. So male and female. So in the work that I do, as you know, I lead Philadelphia's largest homeless shelter. It's certainly not news to us. We see that type of transaction quite often. So there is an interplay there. Absolutely.
What happened after you were sleeping in your car for a little bit?
Yeah, so, and I will share this with you, Chris. This is a story that I don't share very often, and I can honestly say I've never shared the details that I've already shared with you publicly. I haven't. Privately, I share this because of even a little bit of a graphic nature that's involved with that. And as you can imagine, I just sanitized a whole bunch of the details for you as well, right? What was my biggest disappointment throughout that entire ordeal of living in my car for 4 months was as members of the church, because I worked for a church, I was a full-time youth pastor, and eventually I started sleeping on a futon in the church basement. And as you can imagine, became really difficult to hide that over time. And there was one particular occasion where a fellow pastor found me in the bathroom of the church washing myself, right? Because I was doing, the shower just to get ready and to go into the office. And he walked in and he's like, "Yo, dude, what's going on, man?" And so it was the first interactive dialogue that anyone had with me. It was like, "Hey, I've been kind of noticing some strange behavior from you, like what's going on?" And so I took the risk and I just said, "Well, here, dude, here's what's going on. I've been sleeping in my car. And when it's feasible for me to be able to sneak into the church basement and sleep overnight, I've been doing that." And so he says to me, "Oh my God, so what are you doing for showers?" And I'm like, "You just saw it, right? This is kind of how I've been keeping clean, by sneaking in here early in the mornings before everyone else gets to the office and just cleaning myself up." He's like, "Well, dude, man, I can at least offer you a shower." And I'm like, "That'd be great." So here I thought I was going to be walking in a situation where this guy was going to allow me to shower. And he walks into my office a couple hours later and he goes, "Hey, second thought, I don't think I'm going to be able to help you with that." And I'm like, "Why?" And he goes, "Well, I'm busy today and I'm not able to be home, and my wife is worried about being at home alone with you showering." So, Chris, I can say, last year I helped to shelter a third of all the homeless men in the city of Philadelphia at PhillyHouse. One of the drivers and one of the motivations of the dignity, love, and respect and compassion that we share at PhillyHouse, that you've been a part of in terms of volunteering, comes from that moment. To this day, I still question that guy and be like, "What do you think I'm going to do to your wife? What do you think is actually going to... I just want a shower, dude." And so here I am in a Christian church context, even as a pastor, and I'm not even trusted myself, right, with a college degree and all that stuff, to literally get a shower, right? And so that certainly gives me a whole level of empathy for the men that we serve, that if that is what I face, I know they face so much more. That's still a fraction. That's still just a little glimpse of my blip of my own life. To be able to actually have some empathy of what they've experienced, even up to the moment of walking through our doors. If that makes sense.
It does. It sounds like it's such a hit to the dignity already to be experiencing homelessness, and then to be treated that way also, for the gentleman that for your experience, and then the gentleman at PhillyHouse. What is it that you think that people stigmatize a person's experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, I think, we live in such a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality. We live in a culture and a society that is very autonomous and independent, and we expect everyone to be self-reliant in their own devices to do so. And so, repeating what I've already mentioned here, I have had a full-time job. I was even in a Christian ministry. Just that whole expectation that I should have had everything together. Another key piece to this, Chris, I'll share is it wasn't until I took this job at PhillyHouse in November 2018 that I even labeled that era of my life of having experienced homelessness. It wasn't until November 2018 when I took this role to really understand homelessness to its core, because I've always done nonprofit work. I've always done Christian ministry. To look back and understand, again, the journey and the plight and the challenges of the men that we serve at PhillyHouse, to be like, holy shnikes, like, man, what a shish kebab. Like, I was homeless by pure definition. But at that time, Chris, I was just surviving. I was doing what I needed to do to live. And in that moment, there was no pity parties for myself, I can honestly say. I didn't hang my head. I still was going to work every day and hiding it because of some of that stigmatism, but also just kind of a survivor type mentality. You know what I mean? And just grinning and bearing it. So even when I went through a Bible college and I accepted a call into ministry, man, like, honestly, my motto, and my approach in that era was like, well, it's for the sake of the call, man. I was in that moment, and still to this day, living my dream, right? So I was 16 years old, grew up in the Christian family. I wanted to have nothing to do with the church, nothing to do with Christian ministry until, God called me, got my attention, right? Really got my attention. Altered the entire course of my life. I graduated 5th out of 350 from my high school. So a 4.4 GPA, could have gone anywhere. Ended up graduating college with a mound of debt. Right? But it was for the sake of the call. It was just, man, I really, still to this day, of course, had a strong sense of calling. And so I grew up, as I described, in the cornfields of Illinois. So Rockford, Illinois. And I never forget getting cursed out by one of my guidance counselors in high school, where she says to me, "You're a waste. You're a waste of public education by going off to this Bible college and not like pursuing your dreams." My dream was to Top Gun, be an Air Force pilot and study aeronautical engineering, right? And so I had that brain, I had that acumen, and she's like, "You're a waste. Like, why would you throw all that away? All of those full-time scholarships?" And I just simply even responded to her in that moment, because I feel cold, man. Feel cold. So you kind of pick up that cross, if you will, and go after it. And so in that moment of homelessness was that still spirit of not really seeing myself with that label. Now, fast forward to the men that we serve at PhillyHouse. Every single one of them feel that label, which is ironic. So you've been in PhillyHouse enough time. I mean, Would you agree, or what do you see to the men that are coming through our doors that you're helping to serve meals to? Do you see that even on their face, or how do you process, even a statement that I just made that almost all who walk through our doors carry that label of being homeless?
I mean, I think it's just, it's very fascinating how people will use labels. That will be the label that people coming from Bucks County will come down to Philly and they'll see somebody who, they might just be walking on the street and they'll say, oh, look at that homeless person. Like,
Yeah.
that's the word that people choose to see somebody who's just going through it. My immediate reaction when I'm helping out at PhillyHouse is just how there's such a diversity of people's emotions and reactions. Some people are very polite, some people smile, some people thank you, some people do the complete opposite. There's just such a wide range of the reception. But absolutely, I just feel a huge sense of like just desire to help uplift. I feel that the dignity is probably the word that strikes me the most. It's not really about the amazing, food that Fred and Shy make, but it's more about like, hey, you matter, and yeah, that's probably what strikes me.
So, second time I was homeless was before I took this job. So for 8 months, again, coming into PhillyHouse and moving to Philadelphia in November 2018. The 8 months prior to that, when I was living in it, I didn't view myself as being homeless. But by definition, oh yeah, I didn't have a home. And so shortly before moving to Philadelphia, I had moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to be able to take a job with another national nonprofit. And when that job didn't work out, and I was fired, I suddenly find myself as being recently divorced, okay, evicted from my apartment because I lost the job because I was renting a bedroom and a bath. So it was a 2-2 apartment that I was renting from a guy. And so, no lease, and it was just somebody that I met, and he's like, yeah, move in with me, live in, it was a great situation right there in Pompano Beach, Florida. Well, when I lost the job, within weeks, he kicked me out. And so there I was, recently divorced, no money, no assets, and packing the only thing that I owned up in my car, and drove 2,300 miles to pull into the driveway of my parents' house. And I hadn't lived with them since I was 18. So here I was, mid-40s.
How did that feel?
Yeah, humiliating. Very much so. I thank God for my parents. And I even say this, to the homeless guys that we work with at PhillyHouse. I was like, in that situation, by definition, I was homeless. Unemployed, certainly. That's the easy one to embrace. But I could tell them, I actually had a safety net. I had some place to go, though 2,300 miles away from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And most of them, if not all of them, have zero safety net. Probably even for you, if things really fell apart, you know who you could turn to.
I have 5 safety net. Yeah.
Just, and so therefore, thanks be to God, right? And the resources and the connections and the relationships you have, you probably would never find yourself in that situation, right? But most that end up on the street, unhoused, it is the direct result of those broken relationships that then, therefore, we, PhillyHouse, again, Philadelphia's largest homeless shelter, become that safety net. And so, and that means a lot to the guy in the dining room when I'm sitting across from him and say, in my situation, thank God I had a safety net. In this situation, I am thankful we get to be that for you, the safety net. And they know it, right? And because most are walking through our doors after they've spent through the savings in a motel, perhaps lived in the car breaks down, gets towed. I mean, these are the stories, we hear all the time, right? And then last resort that they didn't want to have to face is walking into a shelter.
It's so interesting that the folks that I'll hang out with and might make a comment on the person asking for money with the sign on the street says it's like, it's probably drugs did that. I mean, that's the number one thing that I hear. And then you say it's broken relationships that got them to that point. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's a book that actually we subscribe to, and we even call it our small B Bible because we definitely believe in the big B Bible. Right. But it's a book written that's entitled When Helping Hurts. And so two professors, they basically studied poverty alleviation strategies in third world countries, which frankly deploy in terms of relief and development internationally with other NGOs. They deploy different strategies and approaches to poverty that we as Americans and as even an American church, because this book is written to an audience of American church, to apply the principles of poverty alleviation strategies in third world countries to an American context. And of course, it's written from the frame of mind when helping hurts. In a third world global context, if you ask someone in Africa, if you ask somebody in, poverty of Asia, we as Americans usually define poverty as a lack of materials. They use words that are more subjective and more intangible, that poverty, frankly, is a lack of empowerment, hopelessness, separation, isolation. Like they use very different words. And so for these authors really then to define that in a third world context that is not as materialistic as we are, right? That poverty therefore is the result of broken relationships. And the first relationship they point out, as again, as Christians and faith people, is the broken relationship with God. The second, broken relationship with oneself. Third, broken relationship to society. The next is broken relationship to family. And then last is broken relationship to community. So community different than society. Community being employment, recreation, connection, belonging. The societal one is usually criminal records, police, law, that sort of thing. And so yeah, we see then therefore homelessness and those who walk through our doors not as making people richer with more materials, because the end goal is not to help them transition to the suburban home with the white picket fence. That's not riches, right? When you look at poverty, frankly, being the result of broken relationships, yeah, that's kind of where that comes from. Because have you ever been overseas? You have. You've had some travel. I have to say, I have been in environments in Kenya, I'll use that as an example, where northern Kenya in the district of Turkana, and you look at these people who materially have nothing, and yet on a Sunday morning, underneath the shade of a tree, they're dancing and singing, and you're right, and just have this a joy, and it's just this exuberance of contentment.
Tell me a little bit about how you treat folks at our guests with respect.
I mean, for me, it is driven by my faith perspective, and what the Latin phrase is the Imago Dei, that we were born in the image of God. And so when we view every single living soul from that perspective, it only requires and demands that we share and show that respect. Because God don't make junk, and our Creator designed all of us with a unique design and purpose. I mean, I'm still fascinated in the aspect, like, think of a fingerprint. Like, how? That's crazy. The aspect that we as humankind have such a singular impression on our bodies that can't ever be replicated with a fingerprint. Like, that's crazy to me. So anyway, that type of view of Imago Dei should completely alter on how we view each other by extending each other that ultimate respect.
How do you serve our guests when they are really disrespectful to you?
And to me, that comes down to boundaries. And that does come down to the mutuality of what respect looks like, right? And, I learned at a young age, you got to really understand the bounds, the means and the bounds of your limits. And charity and compassion certainly doesn't require us to be doormats. And so I will say that my approach as president and CEO, and AKA the boss, right, often is much different than the way we train our staff and our team. And let me explain it to you this way, is that I know if I am dealt a whole level of disrespect, call it belligerence, call it even threats of violence, right? And people know, and the individual knows who I am, okay, as the president and CEO, that the buck truly stops with me. What I would be experiencing in that moment is just a fraction of what they're going to show to somebody else lower on the totem pole. And so typically in those situations, Chris, I have found myself that the best thing I can do for my staff and for our team, or even volunteers, like yourself that come and serve meals, is for me to directly handle it. And it's meant that I've been toe-to-toe outside. I've had guns drawn on me. I've had knives drawn on me. And there are times I've had to be out there handling it. But truthfully, again, you've been with us enough time. I mean, it doesn't happen that often. When I first came in November 2018, I would say it happened several times a week. But that was because at that point, we didn't have the culture of dignity and respect and compassion and belonging and hope, which are our values now at PhillyHouse. Like we do today. And the aspect that we now even see that the best way to be able to ensure we get that mutual respect and dignity back is within the first 5 seconds at the door. And we can disarm encountering an interview that oftentimes was speaking the universal language of a smile. Goes a long way, man. Just a smile, right? It's disarming. You suddenly brings your own temperature down if you walk in and I'm just smiling. Hey, how you doing today, man? Now, most of the time, smile like that, making me look a little shifty.
If ever I learned it, if I accidentally cut someone off in traffic, that feeling, and they're just, or if you're at a T intersection and you pass when they do a Philly roll through when they're there. And what I started to learn is I just do this. I just do a little hand wave to them, and I can see their expression go from so angry to, oh, okay. I'll let you go. It's like that little respect, that little dignity of hey, thanks. Hey, like the golfing.
Hey, man. Yeah. It does go a long way.
What is it that you think pushes someone to the point where they feel they need to draw a weapon and threaten someone?
Yeah, so that can, I think, in our context, that can be very easily described by referring back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so, some are familiar with that, maybe others aren't, that might be listening to this, but back in 1959, Maslow came up with a pyramid hierarchy of what all humans need. And so the first and fundamental need that all humans need is food, water, shelter, okay? The next fundamental need is safety and security. So to answer your question, oftentimes that threat of violence or that belligerence or that rudeness is because, number one, they may not even have the most fundamental need being met in their life: food, water, shelter, right? And then next, above that, when you think about safety and security, it's personal. It's perception. It's safety and security mentally, emotionally, obviously physically as well, but even our sense of physical safety or security still starts right here, right? So the next human need that Maslow identifies then is a sense of belonging. You, I, and the rest of us, as he describes, can't ever feel like we belong someplace, in a family, in a relationship, in a friendship, in this studio, right? If, number one, I was fed today, I was sheltered today, I have a sense of security, and of course I'm going to then have a level of a sense of belonging. And then after we have that need met is then we experience and have and receive the need of self-esteem. So you can't think positively about yourself until you have those other needs met. And then ultimately, he describes it as actualization or transcendence. And so that's why even somebody of faith, we view that very literally, that until a guy who walks through our doors has those other basic human needs met, very likely they may not even be able to respond to the gospel, or they may not even be able to respond to a message of good news, or even to think about transcendence. They're not even there, right? They're still stuck on the basement of the human needs. And so, yeah, oftentimes that type of violence, belligerence, is a symptom, not the reason for unmet needs, but the symptom of those unmet needs. And so, it's called de-escalation, where we try to de-escalate that situation, meet the human need. Best way to meet the human need is to listen, have a lot of empathy, a lot of patience, just to simply shut up and listen. Right? The next explanation, Chris, that kind of describes the method of our madness at PhillyHouse, it's what's referred to as the window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance is what we all have in the aspect that we have the ability to be able to critically think, especially in moments in which we're not stressed, that we're not experiencing trauma, or even we have our human needs met, right? And so what trauma often does is it shrinks that window of tolerance almost like this, in the aspect that then it can force somebody to go into what's called hypoarousal or hyperarousal or hypoarousal. So hyperarousal is the adrenaline. Like, man, it makes somebody just pop on a dime, like, what? Well, we live in Philly, so we see that all the time, like you said, referencing driving, right? Hypoarousal is then the shutdown, to go completely numb. And as long as somebody's not within their window of tolerance, they're not able to critically think, act, or behave. So in everything we do at PhillyHouse, we seek to expand that window of tolerance. Another way to look at the window of tolerance is like a river. Okay? The narrower the banks of a river, with a volume of water going through it, it becomes fast. Same. For us to be able to critically process information and things coming at us all the time, the narrower our window of river makes it extremely hard to be able to absorb everything coming at us, and we go in and out of this hypo arousal. So by expanding our window of our tolerance, by expanding those river banks, it does what? It slows everything down. And so everything we do at PhillyHouse is even to slow things down. And of course, we do a lot of that with our tone. Right? So we used to have staff walk into a dining room and yell announcements. You know, hey, guys, line up now. We're going to bring you upstairs. Hey, what? I mean, we overcome that now with microphones. Hey, guys, going to have a smoke break here at about 1 o'clock. And you've seen it, right? It's why we don't yell even announcements, is because if we want that window of tolerance to expand, we need to bring them out of that tyranny and out of that trauma in terms of what they're experiencing with our own tone and our approach. Is this a new concept for you or what?
It's beautiful because I'm in the film industry, so I mean I've been on a bunch of lower budget sets where it's a chaos storm and there's people yelling, all right, so sound, camera, roll, and action, and like a big loud slate clap, and then you go on to like a really refined, like I was on M. Night Shyamalan's set and you could hear a pin drop.
Okay.
There's 40 people on the set, like the slate guy comes in and quiet.
Okay.
Peace.
And my guess is, what was the true productivity or even result of that filming experience describing the two?
Oh, everyone on the quiet set was amazing at what they did, and the shots were exactly what was planned.
Got you.
On time, every time.
Every time. The timeliness, the ordinary, the efficiency.
Tell me a little bit about what excellence means to you and how you manifest that at PhillyHouse.
Well, it's interesting. I'll share this with you. So we do have 5 values at PhillyHouse, and one of the exercises that we do all the time in our monthly staff meeting is to remind each other which value we're drawn to. And so out of a staff of 28, I and one other person always picks excellence. Now, the good news is, Chris, is to the staff and the team at PhillyHouse, to all of them, it's not a surprise that mine would be excellence, right? For me, excellence is one of my values because I really have a lack of patience and I have a deep intolerance for incompetence. So some of that is my type A personality in the aspect that, first of all, I reference my high school accomplishments in academics, but I'm not a smart kid. Like, I failed every IQ test. And so I was the kid that was left out of every honors class, and I had to fight to get into the honors class and AP courses. And a lot of it was because I had friends that were in those classes and they weren't getting A grades. And it ticked me off. So throughout life, one of my shortcomings and weaknesses, if you will, is the aspect that I can't tolerate people who are incompetent at what they do. Like, I think that life is short, and man, if we have a task or a job in life, like, it ought to be always the measure of the best we can do.
Yeah. How is it that being a person who experiences such intolerance for 400% finds themselves serving in an environment where quite a few marks have been missed?
Yeah, on that side of things, I've had to learn the lessons of what it means, though, to pursue and expect excellence, but to also do it with a measure of humility and forgiveness. Grace. That's the answer there. Grace. And because the truth is, ultimately, I'm not perfect. Actually, I am, but maybe. My wife knows otherwise, right? That I'm not perfect. But because that's the truth, is though I'm so driven for excellence, no, I'm not perfect. And so you think about it, how can I then want or desire somebody to maybe have a little bit of grace or forgiveness to my mess ups, right? If equally I'm not willing to offer and extend the same.
Can you tell me how PhillyHouse serves its volunteers?
Hopefully with excellence.
Well, just in general, how have you seen volunteers really gain a lot of value from volunteering at PhillyHouse.
And if I can add our donors to that as well, our volunteers and our donors, within our mission statement at PhillyHouse, we developed this little phrase that just really motivates me, which is we seek to activate the God-given potential for all who walk through our doors. That part of our mission of existence is not just for the homeless dude or the hungry gal, because we serve men and women for our meals. No, I should say, and yes, we want to activate the God-given potential in their life too, to not be homeless, to not be hungry and not be hurting, because that's our customer: homeless, hungry, and hurting. But especially to activate the God-given potential for you as a volunteer and everyone else who walks through our doors. And I think what is awesome is when we first developed that concept, that phrase, that mission, that part of our mission, I remember looking at Jeff Harvey, who's our board chairperson. And so Jeff is a wealth manager with Rockefeller Group. So if you can imagine, he works with the richest of the rich, right? And I remember looking at him and this is a guy who's been volunteering at PhillyHouse for over 20 years. And 18 of the 20 has been on Thanksgiving. So he has served 18 Thanksgivings in a row, which meant that he was bringing his children. His children are now all adults, young adults. And I remember looking at him and saying, because besides, Jeff, why have you been doing it for so long? Because hasn't it activated in you your God-given potential for generosity, for influence over your friends and colleagues and peers and even your clients, your family? It's allowed you to be a better father and activate that God-given potential. And he just, of course, looked back at me and was like, yeah.
Talk about transcendent, that transcendence.
And that transcends it. That's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, that oftentimes, I think with our homeless guests, that transcendence is still far out of reach, because most, if not all of them, at the point of the life that we get to walk alongside them, still don't have their basic needs in life. But for many others, to be able to. And our goal is, I think, in my respect, is for a volunteer or a donor to walk through, and through that act of service and that act of mercy and that act of kindness, that it activates something God-given and God instilled into everyone. And for the most part, isn't that why you come volunteer? Is at the end of the day, you feel better about yourself. You feel like you contributed. And you remember at our gathering of gratitude a couple weeks ago or last week or so, I made this statement that I've never met anyone who regrets giving. That when you give of your time or you give a gift, that I've never met anyone who regrets it. It's like, oh, dang. Matter of fact, I've probably met more people in my life that when they've really tasted the value of true service in terms of an act of mercy and kindness, most say, but you know what? Gosh, I really wish I'd given more or done more of it, or I wish I could do more of it, right?
Well, PhillyHouse served me last summer. PhillyHouse helped keep me alive last summer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing that story?
Next time.
Fair enough.
But it became a habit, which has stuck around, and hanging out with Marianne and John and Shai and you and seeing everybody, it's just, it's I feel activated.
So that is one of our values as well at PhillyHouse, belonging. We definitely are not blind to that. And again, what's awesome is it's a 2-way, 3-way, 4-way, 5-way street. It's not just the homeless dude that we know we give a sense of belonging to. it's a volunteer. It's a donor. Our staff. I had one of our staff at PhillyHouse just this last week. He said, and he was actually meeting with my board, and he looked at the board and he goes, you know what? I'm 57 years old. I've had every kind of job imaginable that, you know, in my lifetime. And he's our midnight to 8 a.m. guy. So he works midnight to 8 a.m. So here he is in front of my board, big old smile on his face, not at all tired. And he goes, and the thing that I really liked about this job at PhillyHouse, because I never knew I had it in me, it's taught me compassion. And I never thought in my entire life that I actually had compassion. And you know, for him just to go on, that's what I have for these guys. I love it. I love it. And I just never knew I had that in me. So again, back to that activate the God-given potential. He never knew it was in him, right? Because, you know, he went on to describe, because one of my jobs, man, I work for SEPTA cleaning subway stations, you know, overnight. Well, if you can imagine that, I don't know. I don't know if I'd have too much compassion with that kind of job.
What's next for you?
What's next for me? You mean personally? Personally, man, I want to own the block. I want to, you know, one of the obvious solutions to homelessness is providing more homes. Just that simple. And I think we can do that. I know we're going to do that. And, you know, we're seeing more and more of an aging population. And these are guys that are 60 years old that don't yet qualify for senior citizen benefits. They're on fixed income. And they just can't afford to have any place to live. And you want to talk about just to strip them of their dignity and humanity and manhood, to find themselves homeless just because they can't afford anything, right?
Is housing a human right?
I am not of that bent or persuasion, because of even what I referred to when helping hurts. Okay, housing is a material possession, and I think that you can be equally homeless without a housing in terms of just understanding that it's not necessarily a human right, but still to be full of just so much purpose of life.
Where can we find you, and where can we find a PhillyHouse?
PhillyHouse is just simply phillyhouse.org, and find me on there. Obviously, I'm very active on my LinkedIn, and I love conversations like this because homelessness is something we have to solve. Homelessness is something that we have to fix, and it takes a community. We can't do this thing alone, right? And it takes everyone getting involved in the extent to make sure that your helping doesn't hurt. And a lot of efforts that we see in this city, as well as throughout the United States, really are just not helpful. So I'd love to have people engaged in that mission. If you live here in Philadelphia and in this area, as we say, we serve 365 lunches a year, as well as 365 dinners, and we never have enough volunteers. And so, as you know, with your experience, that service and that act of mercy and dignity is as simple as delivering a tray to a table. And on the majority of meals, of both lunches and dinners, we don't have enough volunteers just to do that. And the other outcome when we don't have enough is our guests have to stand in line to come through to grab a tray themselves. And like I always say, hey, who loves lines? Anyone? Especially when you're hangry and you're a little bit hot, summer's coming up, or even during winter, forget about it, right? But huge difference for somebody to come into our dining room, not to have to get out of their seat, and yet have somebody with a smile deliver the tray, bust the tray, you know. Yeah, it's just this simple, man. We need more and more help. Literally, we need more and more help just for that simple act, as you know.
So let's say you're driving down 76 and you see a person who's holding the sign asking for money. Should you give them money?
Never. That's when helping hurts. Like most businesses, because we do operate with excellence like any other business, we've identified our competitors. Here is PhillyHouse's competitors, as we serve a third of all the homeless men in the city of Philadelphia. Our first competitor itself is the streets. So the streets, in terms of its autonomy, of its independence, guys and gals, individuals are often able to live off the grid, and that's the way they like it. Of course, it's all the vices and the allures of the streets. Drugs, mental illness is a contributor to that. Some experiencing mental illness don't want to be on their meds. That leads to that. So that's the first competitor. Our second competitor, Chris, is do-gooders. It's every do-gooder that carries the 𝐏𝐢𝐜𝐭𝐮𝐫𝐞𝐬 gift cards in the car, or even the bottle of waters or anything else, because then when they come into the city, or even if they live in the city and they encounter that panhandler at the street corner, out of charity and a level of compassion, they roll down the window and they hand it out. That's the worst thing you can do, because here's why. First of all, you got to look at is at that intersection the amount of water bottles and takeout containers that individual has amassed over days and sometimes weeks. So that being the point, is that for every window that's rolled down and every handout that comes out the window, you allow that individual to stay at that corner another day, another week, another month, and sometimes years. So therefore, you make it almost impossible for us to be able to service their needs, expand their window of tolerance, help them. It's when helping hurts, right? Another metaphor that we use in this respect is, let's say the same individual approaches you on the street, Chris, and says, "Hey, I have a headache." Would you reach into your pocket and hand them aspirin? No. Why? You're not a professional. You have not diagnosed that person's need to be able to understand that an ibuprofen, an aspirin, or anything else that you could have in pocket is really what's going to help them in that situation. In the same way, refer individuals you encounter on the street to PhillyHouse.
How about the person that might say, "Oh, but it's extra help"? How is 10 extra water bottles going to be detrimental to them if they're getting service from you and they're getting 10 water bottles? What's the harm in that?
That being the assumption is that I live in the city as well, and I know these individuals, and no, they never leave the corner. That's why. It's like the rest of us. If our needs are being met at that particular intersection by all the people handing out, we likewise may just choose to stake that to be our turf and not want to come indoors, not to receive shelter and services. Again, using a medical metaphor, right? It's detrimental to our health to be able to not be diagnosed by going into an emergency department or that sort of thing. And it just prolongs the misery by giving something that oftentimes in your mind you've already prescribed or thinking that person needs in terms of a bottle of water, that sort of thing, when that's really not at all what they need. The other element is this, and obviously, even with your question, we're talking about bottles of water. Anything else, okay? It's often resold for drugs. So that's why auto thefts are a big aspect of most of our neighborhoods in this. It's not because they need what is in that car, but anything that is of street value for them to be able to resell. So oftentimes, even bottles of water can be resold. And anyone that has a family member struggling with substance use disorder, you might as well go ahead and roll down your window, help them tap their arm, and tie it off so they can have one more injection. That is a gritty, hard reality and truth.
I learned very recently that the street value of heroin in Philadelphia is $5.
So here in Philadelphia, the public health department will tell you that heroin has really not been on these streets for almost 5 years. It's all fentanyl. 90% of all fentanyl and opioids here in the city of Philadelphia is now laced with tranq, the animal tranquilizer. And there's a new animal tranquilizer. I can't pronounce it. I'm not the doctor. But there's a new one in there that literally causes withdrawal symptoms that causes one to stop breathing. So today, it is hospitals at Jefferson, Penn, and Temple that are trying to figure out in the emergency department how to actually not create these withdrawal symptoms by helping one to be able to essentially kind of detox by injecting them with other things. So Narcan no longer is really helpful in our streets anymore because Narcan does not reverse tranq. And 90% of the drug supply here on the streets of Philadelphia is laced with tranq.
Well, here's a question for you to put your creative hat on for a second. What's something that we could do collectively to permanently put the streets and drugs, your competitors, out of business? What's a way that we could help educate your general layperson on how to not help in the wrong way?
Yeah, so the alternative approach that we educate people for is just because we advocate and we educate to not give out anything, there's so much intangibly that you can give. And I referenced it in terms of the first 5 seconds of somebody coming through our doors. Smiles. Number 2, engage the person. Hey, my name is Chris. What's your name? Hey, and it's back to those broken relationships, right? Most have no interest in recovery and have no interest in some type of addiction treatment because they view their future as being hopeless, that is going to be devoid of anyone willing to walk alongside them in that moment. And so therefore, the misery, the pain, the discomfort of living unhoused on the street here in Kensington or elsewhere in any city of the United States, dealing with substance use disorder, is more so met and caused because there is absolutely no hope that people will truly care to walk alongside them. So what can we collectively do? Hug people. Embrace them. Get to know them. And look beyond the substance use. See the substance use as part of a story. I shared with you some of my stories. For all intents and purposes, I should be a drug addict. Right? Right. I should be a drug addict. And Chris, I didn't even get into the best stories with you. At the moment, my family became a foster family at the age of 10, and I was raised with over 100 brothers and sisters between the age of 10 and 18. That'd be segment number 2, maybe. But that's a whole different aspect. So the promiscuous, drug-laden behaviors I had as early as 12 years old in that environment, yes, Christian home. That's the point, is that getting to know one's story and treating them like a human with that level of dignity and respect, that is what we can all do. That is what we can all do. And that's why even at PhillyHouse, we say, don't come and just serve a meal. Anybody can do that. Come, serve that meal, grab a freaking tray and a plate of food yourself and sit down in the dining room across somebody to listen to a story. Right? And and I don't know whether you've heard me say this, but I am known to walk into the kitchen, and I'll quiz people and say, "Hey, what are we serving tonight?" And people will look down that don't know this because they're first time volunteers, and they say, "Spaghetti and meatballs." Try again. What are we serving tonight? With some salad, a bottle of water. Hey, try it one more time. What are we serving tonight? And then finally, somebody cues in, love. Exactly. Dignity, yeah. Oh, then it starts rolling. Exactly. And don't forget, the food on that plate is just the means in which we serve all of those things like love, dignity, compassion, humanity. Because most of the time, our guests that are sitting in that dining room, they're never served those things. It's not about the food. Right? So in this case, don't make it about the handout out the door. Don't make it about meeting that immediate physical need. Make it about the deeper current of unmet needs. And we can all do that. What do you think?
I'm just soaking it in. It's not about the food.
It's not. It's about the broken relationships. So some of the best achievements and success stories have been when we've done family reunification. This is another aspect that blows people away. So several times a week, we even get emails through our website of the family member looking for their family member. And so one that stands out was the mother that was looking for her son. Because he came to Kensington, his phone died. They hadn't heard from him since December, and the email was sent to us last month in March. And that was the plea in the email. Please, we just want to know he's alive. We lost contact. Can somebody please just get back to me? We just want to know. And if you don't know, that's a better answer than what we're getting right now. Right? And so oftentimes when individuals walk through our doors, that's the first question is, where's home? Can we get you back home?
But repairing those relationships is a long journey.
Sometimes it's just, it can be, yes. I'm not suggesting that family dynamics is easy. But oftentimes it's just the pure disconnection and alienation. And one of the situations I'll give you, the guy got released from prison, walked through our doors. He lost contact with his family. And so his family lived down in Miami, and they flew all the way up to Philadelphia to pick him up because they just lost contact with him because he was behind bars, right? Those are fun stories. Probably our hardest case, his name was Dwayne, and he had schizophrenia. And he was the guy that lived on the steam grate outside my office, right there at the corner of 13th and Vine. Here in Philadelphia, and unless people live here, don't understand what a steam grate is, but our public transportation is below ground, and so there's steam that needs to be released up through these grates all throughout the city. So during the winter, a lot of our homeless people find those grates to sleep on because it's a lot warmer. Well, Dwayne was one of those guys that slept on that grate for a long time. And because of his schizophrenia and his Tourette's, he would just yell expletives all day long, and it scared people. You can imagine. And so our director of homeless services, Aaron, was the one that developed the personal relationship with him. So he was the only one that he would talk to. We would bring him into the shelter and then have to kick him out because he would sit in the dining room masturbating in front of our guests. And so that's really not a cool situation. So, you can't really condone that type of behavior. There is a limit, right? There's a boundary. Well, through the process of continuing to kick him out, one day we found him and saw him out on the grate masturbating, watching the Roman Catholic students pass by. And if you can imagine, no bueno, that's not cool. So we did the hard work of what's called 302. So do you know what 302 is? So instead of calling 911, you can call 911 to 302 somebody. And so it's an involuntary commitment to a mental institution. In order to be able to arrest him, you have to go before a local magistrate and plead a case that demonstrates a history of mental illness in which it makes one a dangerous, a threat to themselves or a threat to others. Well, as you can imagine, sitting on a steam grate, pleasuring himself, we were able to establish a pattern of irregular activity. Long and short, he went off to a mental hospital. 3 weeks later, he was discharged. He has to come back to one place. So the day he was discharged, sitting in Aaron's office, she said, "Where do you want to go?" And he said, "I want to go home." And Aaron said, "But Dwayne, you were kicked out by your mother. Like, that's what led you to be on the streets and have this undiagnosed aspect of schizophrenia. I want to go back home." So she calls up his mom. His mom pleaded with him, Dwayne, I'll move out. You can live with your brother." So the backstory is this. So Dwayne was incarcerated. And in incarceration, he developed the schizophrenia at a moment of bad behavior in which he was put into solitary confinement. While in solitary confinement behind bars, he developed schizophrenia. So then upon release, he moves in with mom. Mom wasn't able to control him because he was explosive, very violent, had to kick him out. So in that phone call, she says, "I will move out. You can live with your brother. You like your brother." And so for Dwayne simply to say, "But Mom, I want to live with you." Because the entire time she thought that she was the trigger of all his anger. But now, medicated and in right mind, with a big smile on his face, I'll never forget his smile. The next day, she arrives with the brother and picked him up. And we saw him hand in hand, walk up the sidewalk, get in the car, and drive off. Still to this day, Aaron calls her once a month to check in on Dwayne. And Dwayne, now we also helped him to get permanent supportive disability, SSDI, disability insurance, and he's doing great.
Talk about repairing relationships and meeting that potential.
That's it. And as you know, here in Philadelphia, there's a lot of Dwaynes on our streets.